This program is brought to you by the partners of A Rood Awakening International. Help others find truth. Support A Rood Awakening International today.
We know Vladimir Putin today as the intimidating and boastful leader of Russia, but where did he come from and how did he come to be so powerful? Mark Fulmer takes us back to Putin's teen years to help us understand what Putin's ambitions are and what may be in store for us in the Western world. Because it's the end of the sixth day, the sun is set, and this is Shabbat Night Live. Hey, Shabbat Shalom, Torah fans. It is Shabbat Night Live with Michael Rood. Everyone knows the name Putin. But where did he come from? And what is he trying to do with Russia and the rest of the world, for that matter? Mark Fulmer shares his perspective as a geopolitical author tonight in episode 2 of Understanding Russia. This is The Rise of Putin. And tonight is the second Shabbat on the 11th month on the astronomically and agriculturally corrected biblical Hebrew calendar. There, you can see it on your screen, and that's pretty much the only place you're going to see it because it's sold out. Yeah, it's sold out. There's no more left. We are now working on the 2025-26 calendar. There's some information on the bottom of the screen, and you can start pre-sale, or well, we're starting a pre-sale on that very soon, so you'll be able to get it very soon. Now, we'll be delivering it after Passover. That's the way that works. Now, let's talk about what's going on with Matt Weimer and Michael Rood. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Scott.
You're welcome. Now, this year's calendar, by the way, is Women of the Bible. And we might follow it up with Men of the Bible. So yeah. This is not your swimsuit calendar or your firefighter's calendar. This is Women of the Bible and all their attributes, and Men of the Bible and all their attributes, and maybe some things that people have not heard before. So all good stuff. Now, Michael, when you started the calendar, we were talking about this before the cameras came on. Why did you decide to do a calendar? There's plenty of Hebrew calendars out there.
Yeshua said, do not follow the Takano and Ma'asim of the Pharisees. And so this is the only calendar that you can use that's not by the Pharisees and Sadducees.
Okay.
You have to stand on your own.
And this is, now you got the information originally, now we get it from a young man named Adam Drissel, and his mentor really was Robert Scott Wadsworth. And is he the one that originally got the
yes,
data for you?
That's right. I worked for Robert Scott Wadsworth for many years to establish the biblical calendar.
Okay, and this is taking into account biblical and extra-biblical records of when new moons happen, this kind of thing, and when little hints we get in Roman records, all that type of thing was all put together, right?
Yeah, that's right, that's right.
And then something to do with NASA and the mirrors on the moon and all that. And
yeah, for 50 years we plotted the course of the moon according to these mirrors on the moon. And with these mirrors, we were able to determine how much of the moon was illuminated.
Ah, okay, that's how that comes in.
That's how we did it. And we also know that we went to the moon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and the Earth is a certain shape. Right.
Yes.
Okay. So let's not get on that topic. We'll be here all night. But anyway, so that's why there was need for a new calendar. So this is actually a very scientific calendar. This is not guessing or conjecture. This is very.
It couldn't be done before now.
Yeah, it's very exacting. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's down to 1/10 millionth of a day.
Wow.
That's how accurate it is.
Goodness, wow. Well, you know, speaking of accuracy, we wanted Matt Weimer to do this month's Love Gift about geography in prophecy.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Yes.
I listened to that. That was really good stuff.
It really was, Matt. And yeah, you were not just blowing smoke. You know, this was really, really good stuff. And there's going to be actually 2 parts to this because it was such a great teaching.
I appreciate the encouragement. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you really proved that what I said about the return of the Messiah can't happen this year. We have to tear out a whole section of the Bible.
That's right.
We'd have to tear them out because they weren't true. Because you developed your thesis in that, in that study right there.
That's right. And it's basically, there's a whole lot of geopolitical things that have to happen yet.
That's right.
Right? That the Bible hints of and just haven't materialized, right?
Exactly, yeah. This specific month here, we delve into Ezekiel 38 and 39 and the nations there. There's things in the nations north of Israel that form an alliance that has to happen before the events of the end times can occur. Therefore, it has to occur before Yeshua returns, obviously.
Okay.
All that has to happen first.
Well, there you go. So we got a lot of waiting to do yet, and a lot of waiting and seeing and watching.
Yeah.
All right,
It's going to get exciting yet.
That's right. And that's the teaching for this month's love gift, for a gift of $50 or more. We just like to say thank you.
It's outstanding.
It is very outstanding. Yes,
Thank you.
Excellent time to get this. Matt's first time teaching, you'll never guess, by the way, because he was a pro up here. So the great stuff. Anyway, the rest of the love gift, we'll let the commercial do the talking. We do a love gift to give you something back for saying thank you for donating to this ministry. It makes everything happen here. That's the only way we can. So thank you, and we just want to show our appreciation. So thank you, gentlemen, by the way. We know Vladimir Putin today as the intimidating and boastful leader of Russia, but where did he come from and how did he come to be so powerful? Mark Fulmer takes us back next. Now, here is Michael with the Kiddush.
Peter, on the day of Pentecost, said that David, King David, was a prophet who saw beforehand the coming of the Messiah. He saw that his son, the Messiah, would be the Kohen Gadol forever after the order of the Melchizedek. And Yeshua, ordained as the Melchizedek, as the high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek, brought forth bread and wine in Yeshua. On the night in which he was betrayed, brought forth bread and wine and interpreted the very thing that Abraham saw so many generations before. Yeshua took bread and he spoke this blessing. Baruch atah Yehovah Eloheinu melech ha'olam, homotzi lechem min haaretz. And he broke the bread and he said, this broken bread represents my broken body, which will be broken for you. By my stripes you will be healed. Do this in remembrance of me. I'm paying the price. Then he took the wine and he said, Baruch atah Yehovah Eloheinu melech ha'olam, Barei Peri Hagafen. Blessed are you, Yehovah, our God, creator of the heavens and the earth, and the creator of the fruit of the vine. And he said, this represents the renewed covenant, which will be paid for in my blood. As often as you break this bread and you drink this cup, you exhibit what I've done for you, because I am making you priests and kings. I'm paying the price. Shabbat Shalom, priests and kings.
In 1991, I had my first radio job in a little town called Stettler, Alberta, in Canada. And I had a roommate there, and one of the knickknacks he had in the apartment was a little piece of the Berlin Wall. And this was a novel thing to have, a little piece of the Berlin Wall, because that had just happened a couple of years ago in 1989. So I remember Reagan saying, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And I knew that was all about the Berlin Wall. And, I was a young man, 19, 20 years old at the time, and starting to get interested in all this stuff that I didn't really dive into before, and wanted to understand more of it. But I didn't know Russia was involved in all of this. And so here we are today, and we have someone that can explain all of that to this day. Please welcome Mark Fulmer.
All right, thank you, Scott.
Yeah,
appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, I was 19, 20 years old when I saw that, and I didn't really understand it, and to say I totally understand it today would be false. So I'm glad you're here, because I'm sure a lot of people are like me, like, how does this all tie together? Like, what happened here with Putin ever since 1991 with Gorbachev, and how do we get to today, and where are we going? So that's why we're doing this series.
Yeah, especially with the film now, with Reagan, that statement has become once again revisited, because you remember Reagan very early on, he called Russia basically this evil empire. And so he didn't mince words to talk to Russia, and because he went toe-to-toe with them, because he knew that they were a powerful threat. But they needed to be dealt with. They were forced to be reckoned with. So when he told us Mikhail Gorbachev had just taken over a frail and struggling Soviet government in 1991. It was bankrupt. After 75 years under the iron boot of communism, the army was poorly clothed and malnourished, and citizens were living such a destitute life. They're trying to sustain the economy. And so he begins a cultural reform as he's now having dialogues with Reagan, a period known as glasnost, which is an openness to foreign policy. So then you began saying, okay, Russia is showing a little sliver of hope is showing there on the horizon. So after several meetings with Reagan, 1989, the Berlin Wall collapses. What incredible. Most people in that generation, such as yourself, actually talk about, wow, there was this feeling of euphoria that now that the big evil empire was finally collapsing, there was now some hope for the world in terms of peace. Everybody had been so worried about in the Cold War era that the possibility of Russia launching nukes. You mentioned about your of time that you lived in. I remember back in the day, in the 60s, early 60s, we would have these drills where if a nuke would hit, and people even back in the 50s during Cold War, because Cuban Missile Crisis in the 60s. And those things were very much entrenched in the consciousness of many American people.
Dive under your school desk.
Dive under, yeah. It is like, okay, if a 10, and here's the thing about it, Scott, if a 10 kiloton nuclear warhead goes off ground zero, the desk is actually going to go away. It's going to be dust. So it really didn't matter a whole lot. But it was interesting. But that was the culture that we had. People had bomb shelters in those days. So now, with 1991 and these dialogues with Russia, between Russia, with Gorbachev and Reagan, it was almost like people had that there's hope. Oh, there's going to be a time of peace. We're not going to have to worry about diving into bomb shelters. But not only that, not only American people were hopeful, Scott, but many Eastern European nations were eager finally to be able to come up for breath after being under the iron boot of communism, nations such as Ukraine especially. After Gorbachev, we have this time of glasnost, as I mentioned, the openness to foreign policy. Boris Yeltsin comes in and he attempts to stabilize power in Moscow after Gorbachev, but still not successful. The economy is in shambles after years, again, the Communist Party and what they had done. So now, the stage is set for Vladimir Putin to come in. And right from this time, we talk about in terms of Russia, not Soviet Union. Soviet Union is gone. That's a thing of the past. Now we're dealing with the Russian Federation under Putin's leadership. Yeltsin had installed Vladimir Putin was actually as a federal security, head of federal security services in 1998. Who was Putin? Putin was actually, he lived in the ghetto outside of east part of Moscow, towards Leningrad, and was a really tough street kid, a fighter. He had to fight for his own survival. He learned very early martial arts, and he was involved with street fighting, and that was a means of survival for him. So he was a tough kid, raised in a tough neighborhood. By the time he is 17 or 18, he knows what he wants to do. He wants to be an officer in the KGB.
Now, just pause there for a second. For those who've heard all about the KGB, and is it akin to the U.S.'s CIA or FBI, or what is it akin to that we might have some familiarity with?
KGB, I'm going to be very politically incorrect here, Scott, for me. Here in the United States, we have the DOJ, FBI, and some of our, CIA somewhat. KGB was involved also with some of the surveillance as well, but they were more, it was the secret police.
Okay.
Because it was something that was created under the Stalin era, because you wanted this 24-hour surveillance of your people. Now, back to what your comment about, was it likened to these agencies here in the United States? Well, we think, okay, the CIA is certainly, they're going to operate with their own domain, and then we got the Department of Justice, we got the FBI. Now, under the Obama administration, there are significant trends that they have become more weaponized against the American people. So it's almost, there's some parallels there. Secret police, because of monitoring the Patriot Act that was actually supposed to be used to surveillance against terrorists.
And then after 2000 or after 9/11, there was the DHS.
Yes, Department of Homeland Security. I work very closely with Department of Homeland Security. We had. A matter of fact, a lot of my I worked with in North Texas and bioterrorism surveillance. We had funding directly from Department of Homeland Security, and as well as the CDC. And so this police state thing, and again, I always tell people, I said, we need to look at the past, learn from the lessons of the past. What happened with Russia? Stalin creating this secret police, and that now because we begin seeing trends here where individuals, let's say if you are, I was with censorship is a prime opportunity. I was speaking at a church in Knoxville, outside of Knoxville, Tennessee, and the pastor was doing that was actually they were doing their Facebook live streaming on it. And he came to announce right after I spoke, he says, Mark, you got to shut down, taken off of Facebook. And I said, Pastor, I'm sorry, that's not the first time that's happened. That's just part of the censorship thing. That,
really? So the live stream was stopped?
It was stopped. So how crazy is that? So I've had messages about violating community content, but where I'm going with all this is that you have this, how similar that is, the secret police state is set up, was involved in censorship, censoring individuals. So you can't say certain things, or you're going to be removed or shadow banned or what have you. That was KGB. That was basically Putin. And so as a 17, 18-year-old young man, he goes and he goes to an army officer right in the KGB headquarters. And he says, I would like to sign up. Of course, the officer looks at him and he says, you've got to get enlisted military first. And he told him all the steps. He said, we would love to have you. But he goes, and that's why Putin's prime ambition is to be an officer in the KGB, which he does all the way up to lieutenant colonel and colonel in KGB. So Putin, he had this notoriety already with the old communist guard. So by the time that Yeltsin installs him, he later has a distinct, because some military background, he has a distinguished military career in 2000 fighting separatist rebels in Chechnya. And the people viewed him as a hero. He was like Colonel Oliver North. He was like this guy that he came back highly decorated, and so is that he was ready, in line when the Russian Federation basically there was an election that Putin had won. And the Russian Federation now becomes rising on the scene. Now, I'm going to tell you a few things about, when I say Russian Federation, oh, that sounds like a nice parliamentarian. Russia claims to have a parliament, but they are purely an autocratic authority, okay? Putin is an autocratic monarch. Really, Prime Minister, President of Russia, whatever title you give him, he still serves in this autocratic function. Even though Russia says, yeah, we have a constitution, not anything to be confused with like the United States Constitution.
So this is basically the man at the top and a bunch of yes men underneath.
It looks good, exactly.
Names of cities and countries have changed since biblical times, but end-time prophecy mentions certain places on the map. So how can we know where these ancient places are today?
In especially Ezekiel 38 and 39, specifically, Ezekiel names 8 different nations. And those nations, when you look them up in Bible atlases, the real scholarly ones, you'll find that 5 of those 8 belong to modern-day Turkey.
A Rood Awakening International's in-house prophecy expert, Matthew Weimer, explains the often missed intricacies of prophetically significant places in this month's Love Gift teaching, Geography and Prophecy. This teaching is not for sale, and it's not available anywhere online. Instead, we'd like to give you this teaching as a thank you gift for donating to A Rood Awakening International. When you donate $50 as a love gift in February, you'll get Geography and Prophecy with Matthew Weimer on DVD, Blu-ray, or streaming on the michaelrood.tv app. Donate $100 and you'll get Geography and Prophecy, plus a pair of designer soaps handmade in Israel by new residents of biblical Judea and Samaria. Donate $300 and you'll get Geography and Prophecy, the pair of designer soaps handmade in Israel, and a beautiful prayer shawl to help you set apart your prayer time with focus and devotion. These gifts are a limited time offer from Michael Rood to thank you for your support. Make your donation today and receive the $50 gift, the $100 gift, or the $300 gift. Thank you. When you donate to receive the love gift, you ensure that these teachings keep coming from A Rood Awakening International. Use your smartphone to scan the QR code on your screen to donate now and receive these limited time gifts. Or call 888-766-3610. Or get your gifts online with a donation at monthlylovegift.com.
The communist regime is no longer in power. What happened in now? Transfer of power that influenced this. You had wealthy Russian oligarchs. These were like, they had links to syndicated crime, Russian mafia. They become really good friends with Putin. And Putin knows. He knows where guys to make friends with, okay? There. And here's the funny thing about it is, well, Putin comes out and he entirely condemns communism. He embraces this kind of form of capitalism with these wealthy Russian oligarchs because they're business people. I always say business in the sense of corrupt business. They're like the mafia, okay? And they begin, much of the, he begins connecting with them, and that actually becomes a shift in Russian economy in that sense. So it's interesting now to see where the economy had been in shambles. Now that there was a gross domestic or GDP, there was signs of economic prosperity in Russia, but right away, Putin seizes upon the opportunity to begin rebuilding the Russian military and to maintain their presence in an international order militarily. This obviously is going to create some tensions with nations like Ukraine and also NATO. We'll talk about NATO and the EU.
Wow. So there's these tensions. So does this mean everyone wants to break off and do their own thing, or where are we headed with this?
Many of the nations, again, this was a setup after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the demise of the Soviet Union in 1991. They began really hungering for their independence from Russia, a Russian authority. And so Ukraine and Poland, and you begin, I'm going to use Ukraine, especially focus on Ukraine, because the context, it leads into the context of what we're talking about geopolitically. So 15, you had 15 former Soviet republics. They're all in line to claim their independence, okay, when the Soviet Union collapses. However, these nations, they have significant hurdles. It's not like they can become automatically democratized, quote unquote, and be set on their own way. And hey, yeah, we've got into we now can write our Declaration of Independence and go about our way. The hurdles were they still had very fragile economies because, again, they were under Soviet domination. And so they were devastated as well. Resources were depleted. Ukraine was no exception. Ukraine was called the breadbasket of Europe because they were so rich with farmland and soil, one of the largest agriculture producers of wheat. And so they were looked at as the breadbasket of Europe for many, many decades.
You know what's funny about that is when I lived, just as an aside, I used to live in Canada. I mentioned that my first job was in Alberta, Canada.
Yeah.
Well, I met my wife in the province next door, Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
There are a lot of Ukrainian people in Saskatchewan. I guess what their main export is wheat.
Yes.
Wheat and canola and things that Ukraine is growing today. In fact, there was such a high Ukrainian population there that when I worked at the radio station there, we would have commercials for Christmas, and then we would have Ukrainian Christmas.
Yes.
Because they worked on the Julian calendar. And, and there was such a large population that we would actually have to create this like almost dual thing.
I'd imagine they're probably leaned toward maybe Greek Orthodox. Ukraine. You know, and like I said, you kind of, they were very prosperous, but now been devastated. And they add to that, but then you have the problem of political instability. Who's going to come to power? Who's going to take? Not an easy solution because they've been under the iron boot. Are we going to appoint democratic leaders? Are we going to have elections? So these are not easy fixes, Scott, overnight. And third major hurdle is the old Russian Guard is reluctant to let go. Whereas Gorbachev and Brezhnev had been open to foreign diplomacy, now Putin begins putting things back together in Russia with the economy and building up the military once again. Now he's looking at, he has one of his greatest regrets is relinquishing control, places like in Ukraine. And matter of fact, he came out and said, I wish we would have never done that. That was probably our biggest mistake ever under Gorbachev, to actually give them the freedoms there. So you have this dynamic tension that is now setting up. So Ukraine still has significant Russian populations in the eastern part of the nation. And in the early independence of the nation, you had these factions. Again, this tension struggle. Those who wanted to break free, they said, man, let's have a clean break. We want to become members of the EU. And man, we want NATO. We want NATO here. Well, there are Russians there. They were kind of saying, no, let's not force this. And still those who were very considered loyal to Russia. Then you had wealthy Russian oligarchs who were in Ukraine. So you talk about a mix of problems there. I had not an easy fix overnight. What happens is power struggles, shifts in power. we began seeing taking place, switching between what were called pro-Russian nationalists in Ukraine and those who really wanted total breakaway, independence. By the time of 2014, a president by the name of Yanukovych is there. Now, Yanukovych, he's trying to play middle of the road. Okay, he's really trying to look at foreign policy at this point, relations with Russia here, trying to say, okay, what do we need to do for the future of Ukraine in order to, to create the greatest amount of peace, prosperity for our nation, but to get along? Well, those that were basically a lot of critics of Yanukovych were there saying, "Nah, he's way too siding with the Russians." Paul Manafort should ring a bell. Paul Manafort was an international foreign policy consultant, and he was in the Trump administration. He served some time in prison because they tried to basically get him on the Russian collusion narratives and try to pin him to the wall. It was really tragic. But Paul Manafort was providing some practical foreign policy advice to Yanukovych, saying, yeah, you're in a difficult situation here, but you want to play your cards right. You don't want to antagonize Russia right now. It's too early to jump in. And he gave him a lot of policy advice, which unfortunately Manafort was nailed to the wall for that and sent to prison. Well, it all came to a head in 2014. There was a demand to impeach Yanukovych because he was reluctant to assign agreements with the European Union and also to allow the furtherance of NATO policies for NATO presence. And I'm going to talk about why is that a problem? Why don't we want NATO in Ukraine? Well, again, back to the tensions. So Yanukovych is reluctant. He's impeached. He's driven out. Maidan Revolution occurs. Maidan is a Ukrainian term for town square in Kiev. Violent, deadly, bloody revolution takes place. Cities are being burned. Statues are being torn down.
This is in 2014.
2014,
right?
the Maidan Revolution here. Now, the question is, okay, with this volatile situation happening in Kiev, all going on with Ukraine and the tensions between Ukraine and Russia, where's United States foreign policy in all this? Victoria Nuland, Secretary of State, picks up the phone right before it all comes to the head with the Maidan Revolution, calls the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine and says, we need to do whatever we can to get Yanukovych out, pull him out, stop him, get him out of there. And then the conversation, by the way, is wiretapped.
Whoops.
The BBC releases the full transcript of it. So we do know that there was CIA present because Victoria Nuland talks about the CIA being there in Ukraine and being in Kiev at the time. Now people think, oh, well, what did the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, have to do with it? Well, let me tell you, the CIA has a very colorful past of actually being involved with violent regime changes. And I list several assassination plots. They go on, things that happened with this Maidan Revolution there. But it's all, you might say, this is just a coincidence. I really believe that the policy, and especially under the Obama administration, was not one of diplomacy. It was actually setting themselves up for the situation that we have now with the war, with the proxy war in Ukraine, which I want to talk about that because now we want to look at the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
I'll bet you did not know that being an Ambassador Club member gets you exclusive early access to tickets to in-person events right here at a Rood Awakening headquarters. And I'll bet you didn't know that Ambassador Club members also get private invitations to surprise sales and other appreciation events, not to mention special gifts, cards, and other nice stuff. So why do ambassadors get all these perks? Because Ambassador Club members are the ones who keep the lights on, who make sure that new teachings keep coming, and they're the ones we can count on because they're committed every month. The Ambassador Club is an automated donation program of $100 a month or more if you'd like. So if you appreciate the consistency of a Rood Awakening videos, social media posts, events, and most importantly, people to pray with you on the phone and help answer your questions, be a part of the consistency that makes it happen. Join the Ambassador Club.
Things came to a head. Some people say that the Maiden Revolution in 2014 was actually the beginning of this war that we see in Ukraine. Actually had its start. There are foreign policy experts that actually say, and military history experts say, yeah, it didn't start with the invasion on February 21st in 2022. We're now almost up to the 3-year anniversary on that. It actually, the stage was set for this. So what would be described as the largest military operation in Europe since World War II was this invasion of Ukraine. Now, I want to preface it this way, a couple of things. Back to, I have a lot of regard for good policy, good foreign policy. A book that I'd like to recommend to the viewing audience here is written by the America First Policy Institute. Some 300 pages. It deals with the war in Ukraine, it deals with Russia, what's happening with China, and deals with some of the best foreign policy solutions, which say this: rather than to use a proxy war, let's sit at the table and see how can we work this out? How can we stop the war? And those are some of the things that I'm passionate about with my heart, because Ukraine is victimized by Putin's desire for Eurasian conflict. Nobody's going to deny that. Is he playing in his sandbox the way he should? No, absolutely not. So as the war nears the 3-year mark in 2025, it comes at a high cost to civilian lives, innocent civilians, as well as military. So when we look at this, what we have on the table, and what do I mean by a proxy war? A proxy war simply is this. It's defined, it's where a more powerful nation or group of nations actually fund a less powerful nation in order to fight an adversary. Proxy war is nothing new. Vietnam War. China and Russia didn't fight the United States. They funded North Viet Cong. They provide them with arms, with weapons. Why? Fight against the United States. We've seen instances of proxy wars, and they typically don't go very well.
And then, like you said, the innocent population gets caught in the middle, and they're like, hey, we didn't ask for this.
Absolutely. And again back, is your geopolitical view one that says, oh, I can treat nations as a pawn on the geopolitical chessboard to achieve my desired outcomes? It's a very selfish one, and I believe should be avoided at all costs. So when we look here now, the United States is not fighting Russia. The European Union's not fighting Russia. It's being funded largely. Ukraine is receiving the funding, the weapons, the support. You guys, you do the dirty work. You go in there. Yeah, we're going to behind you. We're going to write the check for you. So now my question is this. What is on the table is this proxy war. And the concept here, the goal of the proxy war is one of a couple of things. The goal is, first of all, to either wear Russian military down to the point that they wave the white flag and say, okay, we've had enough, we're going to surrender, or completely destroy all their military capability. And we're going to talk about the military capabilities in the next segment, where they render them incapable of any further armed conflict. But I can tell you right now that this war, Putin is not about to back down. Now, Ukraine has been very successful with using especially the advanced drone technology to take out significant military Russian targets. And so they've actually, you hear about these successful incursions. They go in, yay, Ukraine's winning. And then suddenly Russia has a far more superior Air Force capability. They come in and they bomb the living daylights out in retaliation. So this goes back and forth, back and forth. So when I ask the question, we need to ask, is this proxy war working? And even with the best equipment, Scott, the best of resources, Ukraine's got a limited number of personnel. Now, Russia has a significant number of personnel that put into as cannon fodder. Even though there's some morale aspects the Russian people are getting, and there's actually news of Russian soldiers defecting from the army. Putin's running this war. Okay, you guys are going to go in, and at all cost. So who's going to win? What's going to be the outcome of this? Whereas international sanctions, they somewhat slowed Russia's ability down to produce and maintain their equipment. But now, here's the other problem that's developed, Scott. It has forced them with stronger alliances with other adversaries, Communist China being one. Basically, Russian oil for China's assets, munitions, equipment. Is that something? And to me, Communist China is the greatest existential threat. No, it's not global warming, and it's not Russia. See, Russia can be dealt with if dealt with properly through diplomacy and correct foreign policy solutions. China, however, is another huge threat because they are even a more vast nuclear superpower, but they're well entrenched in our nation. They had basically the Wuhan lab that we talked about in China. We partnered with doing gain-of-function research. China's armies are incredible and they're vast. China has 1 million, even though they appear to be having this international diplomacy, spirited diplomacy. China is still China, going back to Tiananmen Square, where they rolled the tanks over the bodies of student protesters. By the way, with Tim Walz being there, and in China, actually, the connections are horrendous. I won't go into any further remark about that. But so we have to consider, and then also not only China, is Russia being more aligned with China, now also with North Korea. Oh, and there's a third player in this, Scott. It's Iran. Yes, because you consider south of the Baltic states, the Russian sphere of influence happens to be in the Middle East. So there have been trades between Russia and Iran. Russia was involved in Afghanistan, what led up to the Afghanistan war, the enemies of Israel, and which can create even greater problems of conflict that I see.
Now, I remember you telling me before the cameras came on that this didn't have to happen, that there was an olive leaf extended and it was refused. So tell us a little bit about that someone was not willing to talk to someone else.
Exactly. Even though there have been, and I'm one for diplomacy, I'm good diplomacy and solutions, coming to the table, working, doing some transactional arrangements. What can we do? And back into the history, even to answer your question, before this, you had the Minsk agreements, 1 and 2, that were done in Helsinki, way before all this happened, with Ukraine and what was going on in the eastern part of Ukraine to maintain peace, and certain terms that were set forth. Russia came to the table and said, look, we don't want NATO forces. We don't want over 30,000 NATO troops and forces and missile launchers right up against our border. We have some problems with it. And so those issues were addressed in the Minsk agreement, and it came out, okay, Russia, you play in your sandbox. We'll work here. We will draw the boundaries here. Minsk 1 and Minsk 2 were constantly violated by the United States, by European Union, okay, NATO, to further push NATO in across those boundaries. So here's the deal. You get to the point. It's just like us. You mentioned about you're from Canada. It'd be like, what if communist China came in and we lined up, okay, along the border of Canada, or even in Mexico? Maybe that'd be even a more realistic scenario. Even in the southern border, the way the border is now, as porous as it is, we're going to come and we're going to put missile launchers all along the side, and we're going to station 30,000 troops there. Right, but no worry, it wasn't any problem. We just said this happens to be just a goodwill gesture. No, it wouldn't, not at all. But that is what you have to kind of look. You have to begin reasoning. Okay, those are those that say, man, we've got to take a big ball bat and go after Russia with everything we can, get them to back off. But there's some sensibilities in terms of foreign policy. And again, I mentioned the resources. So what happened? Back to answer your question, long way around. A call was made by Putin in December there right before the invasion. Say, hey, can we meet? Can we talk about what's going on with NATO expansion in Ukraine?
So a call to the White House.
Call to the White House. Joe Biden says, I'm refusing to talk. And I'm going to give more. Matter of fact, we're going to press for more NATO expansion, Mr. Putin. Forget it. End of phone call. 2 months later, we see this massive, this invasion that takes place. Now, to me, again, getting back to foreign policy and diplomacy, a respected world leader, a president from the United States, needs to give a significant presence and voice to be respected by our adversaries like Russia and China. They need to be there, not to ignore, not to say, I'm not going to talk to you, forget it. That's not how things are done, or that's not how business should be done. So now, Scott, the U.S. has provided over $300 billion in funding for weapons to Ukraine for achieving the goals of whatever outcome for military victory, we don't know. Ukraine, on the other hand, is asked for authorization to utilize what's called lethal weapons. Lethal weapons are the high-powered arsenals. They haven't been granted that authorization in Washington, by Washington, or either NATO, for this reason. They said if you begin using high-powered weapons to take out significant targets in Russia, it's going to result in World War III. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. So we don't, how's this going to play out? So NATO, as well as Washington, has had these reservations about, man, at all costs, we should look at how can we end this war now before it escalates into an even greater world war. So that's in the next segment, wanting to talk about the analysis of some of these Russian capabilities and their presence as a nuclear power. Is it something to worry about or not? And inevitably, World War III. How possible is that? And what can we do to avoid it?
And that is next week. All right, so hang on to that. Thank you, Mark. You hang on to that, pray about that, and tune in next week to find out what Mark has to say about all of this. Thank you for joining us on Shabbat Night Live. We will see you next week. Until then, Shavua Tov. Shabbat Shalom.
Whenever and wherever you are watching this broadcast, it represents hundreds of man-hours of production and post-production, and then it goes out to the world in several different languages. Why is this possible? It's because people like you support this ministry. We do our best to get this out freely to the entire world. Freely you have received. Now, this is your opportunity to do as Yeshua said, and freely give. Shalom, Torah fans. Give this video a thumbs up and share it with a friend. Tap the subscription button and the bell icon. And I promise to update weekly with in-depth biblical research. Be sure to download the new michaelrood.tv app for both mobile and home devices for even more commercial-free content.